I told them just leave it and I would stand on that as well. Travis, thank you so much, Travis Nix, for reading our scripture this morning. And to all of the men who have led us so effectively in worship today, thank you. Jim for leading our singing, Jared Chance for the prayer this morning. Jerry Wells, thank you so much for bringing to my remembrance a very special person in Brother Oliver. What a kind man he was. He preached for the church in Dardanelle for 20 years or more, I guess, way back in the 60s and 70s when I was a youth minister there. In the late 70s, he was the preacher at that time, and I really enjoyed him and getting to know he and his lovely wife and family. Well, I'm so glad you're here today, and I want to tell all of you how much I am thankful for the West Side Church. This is the 8th Thanksgiving that we've been together. I can't believe it's been that long. It has passed, time has passed so quickly for Tammy and me, and we just want to say thank you for all of your kindness to us. What a blessing it is to be friends with so many sweet and wonderful people, and we mean that. We're grateful for our elders here. We're so thankful for our deacons. And I'm especially blessed by my colleagues here on our staff, Casey McDonald and John White. I'm thankful for Rachel and Diva, who serve in our office, and for Tony Forseer, who has joined our staff this past year, working with building maintenance. We just have a wonderful, wonderful team of people working together here at Westside. I'm grateful for all of those who work to make our live stream possible. Every Sunday morning, there's a dedicated group of folks up in the audio-visual booth who are taking care of not only our sound system, but making sure that all of the buttons get pushed at the right time for the live stream, for the PowerPoint. There are just a lot of people that work behind the scenes. I'm going to talk about that in just a few moments. Are you ready for 2020 to come to an end? It has been an interesting year, hasn't it? COVID-19 has affected everybody in some way, from the teachers and students in their school assemblies, to the way we assemble for worship, even in the way that we shop. Do you realize I have not been in a Walmart in over 6 months? My wife does this curbside pickup. Now, every now and then, temptation just overwhelms me and I go to Lowe's. But I haven't been in Walmart in probably the last 6 months. On top of that, this has been an extremely contentious year politically. Civil unrest, riots in our streets throughout the country, a brutal presidential campaign. I think it's a fair assessment to say that not many people will be looking in the rearview mirror as we drive into the new year in just 39 days. But if you think we've had it difficult, just remember the life of the Apostle Paul. For the Apostle Paul faced many difficult circumstances, and yet the thread of thanksgiving runs as a common theme throughout Paul's 13 letters of the New Testament. Consider just a few verses. In Ephesians 5, verse 20, Paul said, always giving thanks in all things through Jesus Christ to God our Father. In the passage that was just read for us by Travis from Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, through prayer and petition, with thanksgiving in your heart. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. In the very next book, Colossians, chapter 3, verse 17, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to him, or through him to God the Father. And then I believe Paul sums it up splendidly when he says in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 18, giving thanks in every circumstance, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. The author Neil Strait said, he who has forgotten the language of gratitude cannot be on speaking terms with happiness. Thankfulness does not depend upon our circumstances. Rather, thankfulness is a mindset. It is a state of the heart. It is a predetermined outlook on life. And what I want us to do this morning is survey the life of the Apostle Paul as we notice three keys to a thankful heart. And the first of these is that Paul was thankful for people. He was thankful for a number of different individuals. Now, sometimes Paul expressed this thankfulness in a generic sense. That is, he expressed thankfulness for a group of individuals without necessarily mentioning them by name. For instance, in Ephesians 1, verse 16, he says, always praying to God and remembering you with thankfulness. In Philippians 1, verse 3, he says, I thank God upon every remembrance of you to the Philippians. Then in Colossians 1, verse 3, he says, always mentioning you with thankfulness in my prayers to the Father. But there were other occasions in Paul's letters when Paul mentioned people specifically. I suppose the most profound example of this is found in Romans 16, the final chapter of the book of Romans. Now, that's not a theological chapter necessarily, but it is a chapter about relationships. Because in Romans 16, Paul mentions by name specifically 24 different individuals. And with many of those, he discusses what they meant to him in his ministry. And he expressed thanks for and greetings to those individuals. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul mentions two individuals for whom he was exceedingly thankful. In verses 20 through 24, he talks about Timothy, his son in the faith, whom he hoped to send to the Philippians, that he might have a first-hand report of how they were doing. And then in verses 25 through 29, he speaks of a man with an unusual name, Epaphroditus, who was a messenger from the Philippian church to Paul while he was under house arrest in Rome, who had risked his life for Paul's sake. And Paul expressed his tremendous appreciation for what Epaphroditus had done and how God had saved him from his illness. I think you and I should be more proactive as we seek to express thanks for the people in our lives. A couple of weeks ago, just very recently, maybe a week before last, my wife went to school one morning, and when she arrived at her school there in Cabot, she found taped to her door a small white paper bag with a card attached. The card was from a fellow teacher thanking Tammy for the love and concern that she showed her students. And in the white paper bag were 6 donut holes. What do you think that little gesture meant to my wife? She talked about it for days. It meant the world to her. Something so small and yet so profound. There are so many people in our lives who work behind the scenes. People at church. When I was preaching in Newport, I remember talking one day to a man named Harold Rutledge, who was a longtime deacon in that church. His responsibility was over the church building. Harold was an electrician and a heating and air man by trade. And as he was changing filters in furnaces, Harold looked up and said, "You know, preacher, it takes a lot of work behind the scenes to have church." And that's exactly right. There are people at Westside that you never see. But if it were not for their efforts, we would not be assembling here today as we do. I want to issue a challenge to you this morning. It's a 39-day challenge. As I mentioned earlier in the lesson, there are 39 days left in 2020. Here's my challenge to every one of us. I'm going to do this. I want you to do it. Every day, I want you to think of somebody in your life that you can thank. It may be somebody at church. It may be somebody where you go to school or where your children go to school or grandchildren. It may be someone you know who works in a store behind a cash register or stocking shelves. It may be the person who delivers your mail, or the person who works for the power company or the water company who enables you to have electricity and running water. It may be the person that works for the street company, the person who drives the truck that picks up your garbage once a week or however that schedule works for you. It may be those individuals who are unsung heroes. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to send them a text message or give them a little card or write them an email or make a phone call. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be profound. You don't have to be a poet. All you have to do is every day for the next 39 days, think of one person that you in some small way can say thank you. Are you willing to do that? Raise your hand. I want a commitment. Are you willing to follow that challenge for 39 days and every day thank somebody in your life who makes your life easier? It may be a doctor, a physician, a nurse, those in the medical profession who are on the front lines through this pandemic, someone working at the hospital. You can go on and on and on with the names of people. Start your list. 39 days thanking others. It'll make a huge difference in their life, and it will change your life. Zig Ziglar told a story about a waiter at a restaurant. He and a group of people were eating, and this waiter was such a good waiter. such a good server. He was conscientious, and yet he was not overbearing. He was punctual, and yet he was not overwhelming. And at the end of the meal, he had made for such a delightful experience, they not only left him a generous tip, but they took a napkin and wrote, "Thank you so much for your excellent service." And they left that note on the table. Zig said that as they were leaving the restaurant, the waiter ran after them with that napkin in his hand and tears in his eyes. He said, "Sirs, wait. I just want to tell you, I have been working here for over 10 years, and this is the first time that anyone has stopped to say thank you." Paul was thankful for the people in his life. Number two, he was thankful for problems. Now, if you think that in order to be thankful, you have to live a life without any problems, think again. Paul experienced so many difficulties in his life. Go to the book of Acts, beginning in chapter 14, which is the first missionary journey. Actually, it begins in Acts 13, but beginning in Acts 14 is where you find persecution really becoming difficult. Paul was stoned and left for dead by the Jews. In Acts 16, he and Silas, beginning their second missionary journey, were imprisoned in Philippi. In Acts 17, the opening verses, he had to slip away secretly from Thessalonica because of opposition from the Jews. In Acts 19, he was accused of inciting a riot and had to leave Ephesus. In Acts 21 and following, he was accused of inciting a riot in Jerusalem. And when he appealed his case before Caesar, he was sent to Rome. During the journey, he was shipwrecked off the coast of Malta. Paul's life was filled with difficulty and with hardship. Over in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 24 through 29, in what is the closest thing to an autobiographical sketch we have of the apostle, he said, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 stripes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A day and a night I have spent adrift at sea. I have been in journeys frequently, and in danger from rivers, in danger from robbers, in danger from my countrymen, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the wilderness, in danger at sea, in danger from false brothers. He said, I have had many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and without food and cold and exposure. And in addition to all of this, he says, there has been the daily pressure of my concern for the churches. And yet, Paul can still write, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. And he can still write, be thankful in every circumstance. Paul was able, even in the midst of his problems, to see a further outcome. In Philippians 1, verses 12 through 18, he talked about his imprisonment in Rome under house arrest as he was writing to the Philippians. And he said, I want you to know that my imprisonment has actually turned out for the good. Because of my imprisonment, he said, the entire palace guard knows about Jesus Christ. Isn't that great? Paul was able to see beyond the problems and give thanks for the opportunities. I read this past week about a little 5-year-old boy who was diagnosed with severe eye problems, and as a result was fitted with glasses that had very large, cumbersome lenses. His mother was very concerned about his first day of kindergarten and how the other children would treat the little boy, so she anxiously waited as he came back out of the school building, got in the car. She said, "How was your day?" He said, "It was great. The boys won't hit me and the girls won't kiss me." That's being thankful, even in the midst of problems. But third, Paul was also very thankful for promises. In 2 Timothy 4, we find Paul's departing words. Paul, at this time, was imprisoned. Now, there were at least two different imprisonments in Rome. The first one was a house arrest, and it was during that first imprisonment in Rome when Paul was under house arrest. He could receive guests, but he was not free to go anywhere, and it was during that imprisonment that he wrote what we commonly call in the New Testament the prison epistles, the prison letters. These were Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. But later on, at the end of his life, Paul was imprisoned in Rome, and this time he wasn't under house arrest. This time, persecution among Christians had become full-blown under Nero. And Paul was imprisoned in a dark, dreary, desolate, dirty Roman dungeon. Isolated from everyone else. Very poor hygiene conditions. He knew that his time was drawing near. Listen to the final words that he wrote. "I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is laid up for me a crown, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall award to me, and not to me only, but to all those who have loved his appearing." What was it that sustained Paul during those difficult, desolate days? It was thankfulness for the promises of God. And what is it that sustains us during difficult times? It is thankfulness for God's promises that he will never leave us, he will never abandon us, his steadfast love and his mercies are faithful. God has not promised skies always blue, flower-strewn pathways all our lives through. God has not promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, peace without pain. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the weary, light for the way, grace for the trials, help from above, unfailing mercy, undying love. The year was about 1991 or 92. It had been a few years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. that occurred somewhere around 1990. Tammy and I, along with our 4 children, were spending Thanksgiving at her aunt and uncle's house in North Carolina. Tammy's Uncle Don was for many years a member of the North Carolina House of Representatives, the state legislature. In that particular year, the state legislature had been hosting a group of of international exchange couples from Russia. And one of these Russian couples was our special guest at our Thanksgiving dinner. Tammy has a large family, and when they all get together, I suppose there's 25, 30 or more people, probably even more now with all the grandchildren figured in. But there was a large gathering of people at her aunt and uncle's house, and as usual, there was a tremendous spread at a buffet line that had been set up that included all types of salads, several varieties of meats, several types of stuffing, all types of vegetables, and even breads of assorted varieties, and an entirely different table filled with desserts. And as the family came together in this large room and held hands with the Russian couple there in our midst, Tammy's Uncle Don led the prayer. And suddenly, this Russian woman burst into tears and loud sobs. And she ran from the room with her husband closely following her. We wondered, had we offended her? Had she become ill? Aunt Patsy went outside to talk with them. She came back in and she said, they're okay. She was just overwhelmed. She had never seen so much food in one place at one time in her life. The next time you want to complain or moan about being a little inconvenienced in life, whether it's due to COVID-19 or whatever it is, the next time you want to complain about wearing a mask, my friend, you need to stop and think about how blessed you really are. When life's difficulties get you down, turn the key of thankfulness. It will change your life. How thankful are you to a Heavenly Father who has loved you so much that He's given His Son to die in your behalf, that God's wrath may be appeased and that you might live with Him for all eternity? How thankful are you for the opportunity to confess faith in Jesus Christ, to turn away from sinful living, to be baptized into Christ and raised up to walk in newness of life? This morning, will you express that thankfulness through your response to God while we stand and sing?